why others get the success you deserve, Buddhism, Kamma, and your peace. The Buddha described 4 kinds of Kamma. There's dark Kamma with dark result, bright Kamma with bright result, Kamma that's both dark and bright, the result being both dark and bright. And then there's the Kamma that's neither dark nor bright, which leads to the end of Kamma. Dark Kamma would be breaking the precepts. Its dark result would be falling to a lower realm. Bright Kamma is holding by the precepts, and as a result, you go to a higher realm. If your Kamma is dark and bright, in other words, it's a mixture of breaking the precepts, not breaking the precepts. It goes to a more middling result, the Kamma that's neither dark nor bright, that leads to the end of Kamma, is the Noble Eightfold Path. It leads to the end of Kamma in that it takes you to a state of awareness that doesn't need to be maintained, where there's nothing you have to do. As Ajahn Mun said, it's beyond all activity. Or as Ajahn Lee said, Nibbana is easy. Everything in the world has to be maintained. Once you gain Nibbana though, there's nothing you have to maintain. Of course, getting there isn't easy, but once you get there, you can put all your burdens down. What's interesting is that there's an overlap between bright Kamma and the Kamma that's neither dark nor bright. To begin with, both of them are the kinds of Kamma the Buddha would recommend. He wouldn't recommend mixed Kamma. In other words, doing things with mixed motives, breaking the precepts sometimes and holding them at others. He'd recommend that you get your motives and actions as skillful as possible. But the interesting overlap is that the precepts figure in both bright Kamma and the Kamma that's neither dark nor bright. The difference seems to be that with bright Kamma, you're simply trying to hold by the precepts for the sake of gaining a good rebirth. But you're not just following the rules. Your practice of the precepts is based on a sense of goodwill for the beings you're living with, but it's for the purpose of a good future within the bounds of becoming. One of the motivations for following the precepts is not just that you will gain good results, but you also think about other beings. You wouldn't like to be killed. You wouldn't like to have people steal things from you. You wouldn't like someone to have sex with your partner. You don't like to be lied to. You don't like dealing with drunks. Well, other people are like you. Put their heart in your heart is a phrase they say in Thai, so you're not just rule-abiding. You do develop some good mental qualities, positive mental qualities, as you observe the precepts. You realize that this is a way of showing goodwill. It's a way of showing compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity. Equanimity in the sense that you realize there are some things you would like to gain, but the only way you could gain them would be by taking the precepts. So you realize you have to give them up. With empathetic joy, you see other people are wealthy and you're not wealthy, but you're happy for them. You don't think of taking their wealth away. Compassion. You realize there are people that you're in a position where you could harm and probably get away with it, but you don't want to. You feel for them. So it's not just a matter of following the rules, although you do follow the rules. I was reading someone saying that the use of discernment with regard to the precepts is figuring out when to hold by them and when not to hold by them. That's not very discerning at all. That's just the way of the world. As the Buddha pointed out, it's not the case that people who lie a lot are lying more than they're not lying, or people who kill a lot are killing more than they're not killing. There's a mix for everybody. But still, the vast majority of people break the precepts sometimes, but not at other times. There's no wisdom in that. True wisdom lies in realizing that there are times when you know something that somebody else might want to know, but they would abuse that knowledge if you gave it to them, and they ask you about it. What are you going to do? How do you not divulge the knowledge without lying at the same time? Or you've got pests in your house. How do you live with them so that they don't damage you or your home, but at the same time you're not going to kill them? That's where your discernment gets tested, but that's still on the level of bright Kamma that leads to a bright result. In other words, it leads to rebirth. As for the precepts that come under the Noble Eightfold Path, under the factors of right speech, right action, right livelihood, what makes them special, what makes them the Kamma that's neither dark nor bright, is the context. They're based on right view, they're based on right resolve, and they lead to right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. In other words, they're part of training the mind. You practice the precepts, say, as a way of expressing your goodwill, but at the same time, you're also using them to develop your mindfulness, your ardency, your alertness. Those are qualities you're going to need as you practice mindfulness, and especially the kind of mindfulness that leads to concentration. Mindfulness, of course, is keeping something in mind. When you take on a precept, you've got to keep it in mind all the time. Don't forget, alertness. You have to be alert to what you're doing to make sure that it's actually in line with the precept. And ardency. You're going to hold well to these things. Whatever the challenge is, you do your best not to break the precepts. You're doing that as a way of training the mind to develop the qualities you're going to need in concentration. You're doing it to gain a sense of lightness, a sense of not having harmed anybody and being a principled person. There's a joy that comes in knowing that you have principles. Other people around you may break their principles, or may not even have any principles to break, but you know that you have principles that you hold on to. That attitude, the sense of well-being that comes from being principled, is really conducive to concentration because as you're going to get to settle the mind down, you let go of your ordinary thinking. The mind gets into a state where it's more tender than normal as it's beginning to get snug with its object, but it's not quite there yet. This is the part of concentration where people who are going to have visions tend to have visions, either as they're settling down or as they're coming out, because things are tender. But if you've been doing wrong in the course of the day, harming somebody, harming yourself, it's going to come up in that tender zone as the mind begins to settle down, and you'll have two reactions. Either it's like an open wound and it really hurts, or it's like scar tissue. You deny that you did wrong. Neither is going to be helpful for concentration. Years back, I was helping to lead a retreat, and in the middle of the retreat, one man started breaking down and crying, huge sobs. I was freaked out. It was the first time I'd ever been in a retreat where something like that happened. People who frequent retreats tell me it's normal. It turned out that he had been a drug dealer. As his mind was finally getting settled down in concentration, he started thinking about all the people whose lives he had ruined. That's how not observing the precepts can get in the way of concentration. But as thoughts of the day come in, as you're trying to get the mind to settle down and you realize you've harmed nobody, you've held by your principles, it's easy for the mind to get settled down and to stay. That's the kind of virtue the Buddha said is pleasing to the noble ones. On the one hand, none of the precepts are broken, but at the same time, it puts the mind in a good frame of mind where you feel good about yourself. That makes the mind easy to settle down in concentration. So as you practice the virtue for the sake of the path, in the context of the path as a whole, that changes the nature of what you're doing. You're not just hoping for good results in some future state. You're treating it as part of training the mind in mindfulness, ardency, alertness, getting the mind prepared to settle down in concentration. The kind of concentration where you can be honest with yourself, because it's only when your concentration is honest that it's going to be conducive to discernment. After all, what are going to see with your discernment? You're going to be seeing mistakes you're making here in the present moment. You have to be really honest with yourself to see that sort of thing. The whole purpose of concentration is to help you see how you create a state of becoming in the mind. It's something you're doing right now. You're not just hoping that some good karma of the past will suddenly show up and do it all for you. You've got to do the work right here, right now. It's a very strong lesson in the power of your present karma. But if you're used to being honest with yourself, honest in observing the precepts, you're going to be very honest and observant in what you're doing. And that's going to be conducive to discerning how you're creating unnecessary suffering and how you can stop. So the attitude you bring to the quality of virtue is going to determine whether it's bright or neither bright nor dark, whether it's going to lead simply to a good rebirth or to something better. Either way, you benefit. But if you practice the precepts with the purpose of making them part of the path to the end of suffering, you benefit more. The purpose of empathetic joy. When the Buddha lists the Brahma Viharas, he notes that if you use the different themes of the Brahma Viharas as topics of meditation, as you go up the list, you get to higher and higher levels of concentration. Compassion leads to a higher level of concentration than goodwill, perhaps because the desire to help those who are suffering, or those who are creating the causes for suffering, is a more uplifting emotion than the simple desire to see beings be happy. You open up your heart more to those who are suffering, and with that opening of the heart, there's a greater sense of joy, a greater sense of calm, well-being, which allows the mind to get a deeper concentration. Higher than compassion, though, is empathetic joy. And you might wonder, isn't it a higher thing to feel compassion for those who are suffering than to be happy for those who are happy? Well, it's more than just being happy for those who are happy. You think about the fact that they did something in order to gain that happiness. In fact, you're also happy for those who are creating the causes for happiness now. There's a sense of joy in seeing that the teachings on Kamma really work. You do skillful things, and there will be rewards. That's a somewhat more impersonal principle, but it lifts the mind to a higher state because it's getting you out of the way. Think about it. What are the attitudes in your mind that would interfere with empathetic joy? They're all very childish. One is if you see someone who has something that you want, but you don't have, and you feel resentment, jealousy, envy. But when you're able to overcome that and take yourself out of the picture, that heightens the concentration. There are also cases where people have done things that lead to happiness, who acted skillfully in the past, but they're not skillful anymore. In fact, they've taken the results of their past skillful actions, and now they're abusing them. And you don't like it. You don't want to see them be happy. You feel they don't deserve their happiness. But when you think in the terms of the principle of Kamma, they did something, someplace in the past that leads to that happiness. And even though they're spoiling the results, the fact that you're willing to accept the principle of Kamma, that good actions based on good intentions do lead to good results, it lifts the mind, but it also gives rise to a sense of samvega. You realize that you can do good things many, many times, and then somehow the mind can change. We see so many cases like this. People come into a position of power. People have wealth. People have beauty. People have strength. And they must have done something in the past for those things to come about. But now they let it go to their heads. People with power feel they're invincible. People with beauty think they can get away with anything. People with strength can force their will on others. So it makes you realize that if you're going to be aiming for happiness, You don't want to content yourself with the happiness of the world because it's not safe. The only safe happiness is the safety of the noble attainments. So as you develop empathetic joy in this way, it leads to a more mature attitude, as you accept the impersonality of the principle of Kamma, and also you come to admit the limitations of Kamma. After all, the Buddha said there are 4 kinds of Kamma: bright, good actions that lead to a good rebirth, dark, bad actions that lead to a bad rebirth, mixed, bright and dark, which will lead to a rebirth where there's pain mixed with pleasure, like the human realm. But then there's a 4th level of Kamma, Kamma that leads to the end of Kamma, and that's the noble eightfold path. It's only when you see the limitations of even the best bright Kamma that you're willing to go for the noble path. This is a pattern throughout the Buddha's teachings, as in his step-by-step discourse. He starts with generosity, giving, virtue, the virtue of restraint, and then the rewards of giving and virtue, the various heavenly realms that you can enjoy. That's bright Kamma. But then he talks about the drawbacks of sensuality. He calls them not only drawbacks, but also the degradation that sensuality involves. Here you are, just eating up the results of your old actions, and you're not producing anything good to replace them. So of course you're going to fall. And as I said a while back, it's as if samsara is a sick joke. You work really hard to develop good qualities, and then when you get the rewards for those good qualities, they spoil you, unless you devote them to the noble paths. So with the next step in that step-by-step discourse, when you've seen the degradation of sensuality, you begin to think, well, maybe renunciation is a good thing. Renunciation here, of course, means not only giving up sensual pleasures, but also providing yourself with a better pleasure to replace them, which is what we're doing as we meditate. We're working on the pleasure of form, the body, as it's experienced from within. We're making it as pleasant as possible, to give the mind the food it needs in order to practice, to settle down, be still, and see things as they really are, to see the movements of the mind as they're actually happening, to see the extent to which you're fabricating your experience, and then the value of those fabrications. Which ones are useful, which ones are not. When you're engaged in concentration, you see these things more clearly. I was doing a Zoom teaching this afternoon, and one of the questions was, I've been meditating for many years, but I've never really looked into these jhanas. Do you think they really are necessary? As I told the questioner, how are you going to see the processes of fabrication unless you get the mind really, really still? At the same time, you use the processes of fabrication to create that state of concentration. As someone once said, the things we know best are the things we do. You do concentration by taking form, feelings, perceptions, fabrications, and consciousness, and turning them into a state of concentration. That's how you really get to know them. If you don't use them like this, you don't know them. And if you don't know them, how can you gain insight into them? Of course, on top of that, when the mind is really still like this, you can see really subtle levels of fabrication you wouldn't have seen otherwise. That's when the mind is ready for the 4 noble truths. To see the extent to which you're creating stress where you don't have to. You work on developing dispassion for the stress. You abandon the cause, and the mind opens up to cessation. Cessation doesn't mean only that these things stop. When they stop, there's an experience of the deathless. And when you hit that, that's when your happiness is safe. Up until this point, everything is unsafe. Even jhana is unsafe. You can develop a sense of pride around it. You can get complacent about it. There are periods where it comes really easily and you get lazy about it. And you can decide that you're satisfied with that level of pleasure, and you stop right there. So there are dangers, even in the concentration, that bliss of concentration. It's when you've had your first taste of the deathless, that's when you found something that's totally safe. So when you reflect on empathetic joy, do precisely that. Reflect. Remember the Buddha's image of the mirror that he taught to Rahula. When he introduced the practice as a whole, he started with the image of a mirror. You're going to be looking at yourself, and in particular, at your actions. When you see people doing good things that would lead to happiness, you see them enjoying the results of those good things. It inspires you to turn around and do good things as well. When you see people who are enjoying the results of their past good actions, but they're abusing them, it should inspire you to aspire to something higher, to a happiness that's really safe. It's when you've reached that happiness that you know that you've used the contemplation of empathetic joy to its best purpose. Remember that all the teachings, all dhammas have an attha, a goal, a purpose. You don't just sit with them. You take them someplace, and they take you someplace. There was another question that came up today. A woman had been meditating for many years and said she was afraid that she was becoming a hypocrite about her meditation. How so? Because she wanted results, and that was craving, right? Isn't craving wrong? I told her, not always. Desire is what motivates the path. It's simply a question of making sure that your desires are aimed at the right goal. You use the Dhamma to get to that goal. That's what it's for. So when you've used empathetic joy to the point where it opens the mind to something deathless, that's when you know you've used this particular teaching, this particular practice, for its intended purpose. You've reaped the rewards. You've gained the benefits. And you realize that this is why the Buddha taught. This is why he had the compassion to set out the religion, to establish the Dhamma and Vinaya, so that people thousands of years afterwards, in another part of the world, could taste these benefits. This is why the experience of the deathless is accompanied by a sense of intense gratitude for the Buddha, for what he did to find this happiness, and what he did to keep the path to this happiness open as long as it's been open. Ajahn Suwat said that when you've completed the path, as far as you're concerned, weeds can grow up on the path again. But then you look back and you see that other people want to find the end of suffering as well. So when you see other people putting stones and other obstacles on the path, you want to clear them away because you've seen that the attha of the Dhamma, when the Dhamma is practiced in accord with the Dhamma, is so excellent, and you want to do what you can to keep that opening, that possibility, alive for whoever wants it.